The sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops, painting the quiet suburban street in warm shades of orange and pink. It was Saturday evening, the perfect time for a little celebration. In one of the houses on the street, a small backyard was being prepared for a casual party. String lights were being hung across the patio, casting a soft glow over the neatly trimmed lawn. A few chairs were arranged in a circle, and a small speaker sat on a table, ready to fill the air with music. Friends were arriving, carrying snacks, drinks, and laughter. Everyone was in high spirits, excited to share this simple moment together after a busy week. The group was careful not to make too much noise. They wanted to enjoy themselves, but also knew the neighborhood had rules. Some of them were new to the area and still learning how things worked here. Others had lived there for years and knew that the Homeowners Association, or HOA, was strict about noise, gatherings, and other rules meant to keep the neighborhood orderly. Even so, they believed a small backyard party would be acceptable, especially with music played at a low volume and laughter kept light. Meanwhile, down the street, Karen, a woman in her 50s with a sharp gaze and an air of authority, was making her usual rounds. She wore a crisp blouse neatly tucked into a skirt and carried a clipboard with HOA notices. Karen was known in the neighborhood for her strict adherence to the rules. If there was a small misstep, she was quick to note it. Some neighbors called her Karen behind her back. Not for any personal grudge, but because she had become a symbol of strict enforcement, a force to be reckoned with. She took her role very seriously and often felt a deep sense of satisfaction when she could correct what she saw as violations. Karen's steps were precise as she walked the sidewalk, scanning every house she passed. She noticed a few open windows and well-kept lawns, but nothing that raised her suspicion at first. Her sharp eyes, however, picked up a hint of movement in one of the backyards. Soft laughter, faint music, and the glow of lights caught her attention. Her frown deepened. This was the kind of situation she disliked, a potential disturbance that she might need to address. Back in the backyard, the friends were setting up games and arranging food on the table. One of them plugged in a small speaker and played a light, cheerful playlist. Conversation flowed easily, stories were shared, and laughter came naturally. It was the kind of evening that felt like a brief escape from the stresses of everyday life. People were smiling, joking, and enjoying each other's company. No one intended to upset anyone, and everyone believed they were acting responsibly. As Karen approached closer, the sounds became clearer. She could hear the laughter and the faint rhythm of the music. Her pace quickened slightly, and her lips pressed together. This was not acceptable, she thought. She was determined to uphold the rules, even if it meant interrupting the evening. In her mind, enforcing the HOA's regulations was not just about authority. It was about protecting the community, maintaining order, and ensuring that everyone followed the same standards. The friends, completely unaware of Karen's approach, continued with their preparations. Some were arranging snacks, others were greeting late arrivals, and a few were laughing over a joke someone had just shared. The air was warm, the sky was beautiful, and the sense of calm and happiness was almost tangible. It was easy to forget, in that moment, that there was an outside force approaching with a completely different agenda. Karen stepped onto the grass, her eyes scanning the gathering. She held her clipboard firmly, ready to note every detail. As she drew closer, the friends noticed her presence. There was a moment of silence, as if the music and laughter had been paused by her arrival. Some of the guests exchanged nervous glances, while others tried to smile politely. They had seen Karen before, always strict and unyielding, but they hadn't expected her to show up tonight. Karen cleared her throat and addressed the group. Her voice was firm, carrying authority that could make anyone straighten their posture. She began by stating that she had noticed the gathering and wanted to ensure everyone was aware of the HOA's rules regarding noise and events. The friends tried to respond politely, explaining that it was a small celebration. But Karen continued, her tone unwavering. She spoke about potential violations, fines, and the importance of following regulations to maintain harmony in the neighborhood. The conversation was tense, but civil. The friends were careful not to raise their voices or appear confrontational. They listened respectfully, hoping to reason with her. Karen, however, seemed set on making her point clear. She gestured toward the lights in the speaker, pointing out each potential infraction as if marking them off on her clipboard. The group tried to explain that the music was low, the gathering was limited to a few people, and that they were being mindful of the neighbors. Karen remained firm, unconvinced that these measures were enough. The atmosphere began to shift. The warmth and joy of the evening were slowly replaced by tension. Friends whispered to each other, wondering how this confrontation would end. They could see Karen's determination and realized that simply explaining themselves might not be sufficient. Yet, they stayed calm, knowing that any sign of aggression or frustration could escalate the situation. It was a delicate balance, maintaining composure, while facing someone who believed she was in the right. As the minutes passed, Karen's scrutiny seemed to intensify. She walked around the perimeter of the backyard, her eyes sharp and her posture rigid. The friends followed her movements with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They wondered if she would insist on ending the party or if she would demand that certain items be removed or adjusted. It was clear that Karen was not just performing a routine check. She was actively seeking reasons to enforce the rules. And the friends were caught in the middle. Despite the tension, some members of the group tried to lighten the mood with small jokes and smiles. It was an instinctive attempt to remind everyone, including Karen, this was supposed to be a friendly and enjoyable evening. Karen, however, seemed impervious to the humor, maintaining her serious demeanor and focusing solely on the regulations. Her presence loomed over the gathering like a shadow, and the friends could feel the weight of her authority pressing down on them in the background. The neighborhood itself remained calm and quiet. Other houses were dark, the streets were empty, and the only sounds were the faint music and laughter now tinged with anxiety. It was a typical suburban setting, peaceful on most days. But tonight, it was a stage for a clash between strict rules and simple human joy. The contrast was striking. On one side, a group of friends trying to enjoy life, and on the other, a vigilant enforcer determined to maintain order. The sun continued to set, casting longer shadows across the lawn. The string lights flickered gently in the evening breeze, creating a warm glow that almost seemed to defy the tension in the air. Friends whispered among themselves, trying to figure out the best way to handle the situation. Some suggested turning the music off temporarily, while others argued that it should not have to come to that. They were weighing their options carefully, aware that any decision could influence the outcome of this unexpected confrontation. Karen, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the backyard, clipboard in hand, surveying the scene with satisfaction. She felt a sense of purpose in her role, believing that her actions were necessary to maintain the neighborhood's standards. She did not see herself as the antagonist. In her mind, she was the guardian of order, ensuring that rules were followed and that potential disruptions were addressed promptly. Her determination was clear. It set the stage for what was about to unfold. The friends continued to engage with her calmly, explaining their perspective and attempting to find common ground. They emphasized that the gathering was respectful, the noise minimal, and the intention purely social. They hoped that reason and politeness would be enough to diffuse the situation. Karen listened, nodding occasionally, but her strict stance remained unchanged. The tension in the air was palpable, creating a delicate balance between compliance and resistance. As the evening progressed, the first part of the story came to a natural pause. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test patience, rules, and human interaction. The friends remained hopeful, trying to enjoy the evening despite the unexpected challenge. While Karen prepared to assert her authority fully, the calm before the storm held everyone's attention, each person waiting to see how the next moments would unfold. This was the beginning of a true real-life story, where personalities, rules, and human emotions would collide in a way that would leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. The tension in the backyard was palpable as Karen stood with her clipboard, her eyes sharp and unwavering. The music that had been softly playing just moments before seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the quiet murmurs and uneasy glances of the partygoers. The friends had hoped that Karen might just walk away, satisfied that everything seemed calm. But that hope vanished as soon as she took a deep breath and began to speak. Karen's voice carried across the backyard, firm and deliberate. She began by outlining what she perceived as violations, pointing to the music and the gathering. She spoke of rules, regulations, and fines, her words precise, as though reading from a manual she had memorized. The friends listened respectfully, nodding where appropriate, trying to show that they were not dismissive, yet inside, a mix of frustration and nervousness bubbled up. They knew that Karen was strict, but they had hoped reason would prevail, that she would see this was a small, harmless celebration. One of the friends stepped forward cautiously, trying to explain that the music was at a low volume and that the gathering included only a few people. They emphasized that they had tried to respect the neighborhood's quiet atmosphere. Karen's gaze swept across them, and for a moment her expression softened, as if she was considering their words. But almost instantly, the stern look returned. She pointed to the string lights and the speaker, stating that even small things could be violations if they disturbed others. Her tone was unwavering, leaving little room for argument. The conversation grew more tense as the friends tried to reason with her. They spoke calmly, outlining their understanding of the HOA rules and highlighting their efforts to comply. Some gestured to the quietness of the street and the lack of complaints from neighbors. Others emphasized that this was a once-in-a-while celebration, not a recurring disruption. Karen, however, seemed prepared for every response. She countered with references to specific regulations and past instances she claimed proved the importance of strict enforcement. The group began to realize that simple explanations might not be enough, despite the growing tension. There was a sense of resilience among the friends. They were determined to enjoy the evening without letting it spiral out of control. One friend suggested lowering the volume further and moving some of the activities closer to the center of the backyard, away from the edges near the street. Another offered to explain the situation to nearby neighbors if they were concerned. These small gestures were meant to show cooperation, yet Karen's watchful eyes seemed to take note of every detail. Every minor movement, as if she were cataloging evidence. A subtle shift began to occur. Some of the friends became quieter, unsure whether their explanations were making any difference. Others whispered among themselves, discussing strategies for how to handle this unexpected confrontation. The mixture of anxiety and determination created a strange tension in the air. Everyone was aware that Karen's presence had transformed a simple, joyful gathering into a moment of delicate negotiation, one that required patience and composure. Karen, meanwhile, continued her inspection. She walked slowly around the perimeter of the backyard, her steps measured and deliberate. She leaned slightly closer to inspect the setup of chairs and tables, her eyes scanning for anything that could be construed as a violation. The friends followed her movements silently, some with curiosity, some with apprehension. Each glance, each note on her clipboard, added weight to the situation. It was clear that Karen was not merely performing a routine check. She was fully engaged in asserting her authority, and the friends were caught in the midst of it. One friend, braver than the others, tried to lighten the mood by joking about the meticulous nature of Karen's inspection. The joke was met with awkward laughter from the group, but Karen's expression remained serious. She did not smile, did not laugh, and did not show any sign that humor could influence her perspective. It was a stark reminder that she viewed her role as a matter of responsibility, and nothing else seemed to matter. The minutes ticked by, each one adding to the intensity of the moment. The group continued to engage politely, offering explanations, suggesting compromises, and trying to demonstrate that they were respectful of the rules. Karen listened, occasionally making notes on her clipboard, occasionally glancing around to ensure nothing was being overlooked. Her presence was commanding, and the friends felt a mix of respect and trepidation. They knew that one wrong move could escalate the situation, yet they remained determined to find a peaceful resolution in the midst of the tension. The backyard itself seemed to hold its breath. The string lights swayed gently in the evening breeze. The small speaker remained silent, as if respecting the gravity of the moment. And the soft shadows cast by the setting sun stretched across the lawn. The friends could feel the weight of the situation, the fine balance between compliance and enjoyment. Every word, every gesture mattered, and everyone was acutely aware of the fragile nature of this encounter. Karen paused for a moment. looking around at the faces before her. She seemed to be considering her next words carefully. The friends held their breath, unsure whether she would demand an immediate end to the party or allow them to continue under certain conditions. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the evening wind. It was a moment of suspense, a pause that held the potential to shift the entire evening in one direction or another. Finally, Karen spoke again, her voice measured but firm. She reiterated the importance of following the HOA rules, emphasizing that even small gatherings could be subject to scrutiny. She listed specific potential violations, making it clear that she was aware of every detail. The friends nodded politely, responding calmly, trying to show that they understood her concerns. They assured her that they were doing everything possible to comply, adjusting the volume of the music, keeping the gathering small, and being mindful of their surroundings. Despite their efforts, Karen remained skeptical. Her eyes scanned the group, noting minor details and imperfections that the friends themselves had not considered. She pointed out the arrangement of chairs, the placement of the lights, and even the direction in which the food was served. Each observation was presented as a potential concern. The friends found themselves defending choices they had never thought could be questioned. The situation was becoming increasingly complex, and the tension in the air thickened as the conversation continued. The friends began to notice subtle shifts in Karen's demeanor. While she remained firm and authoritative, there were brief moments when her confidence seemed to waver. A question she posed about the frequency of gatherings, pause before making a note on her clipboard, and a slight hesitation in her tone all hinted at cracks in her otherwise unyielding stance. The friends, still maintaining their composure, sensed that reason might eventually prevail if they continued to stay calm and respectful. The evening wore on, the sun sinking lower and the sky deepening into shades of twilight. The backyard was illuminated by the soft glow of the string lights, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere despite the tension. Friends continued to engage with Karen, answering questions, providing explanations, and offering reassurances. Each exchange was a delicate dance, balancing politeness with assertiveness, ensuring that no one lost face while also attempting to maintain control of the situation. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to be measuring the group, assessing whether they were sincere in their explanations or simply trying to evade rules. Her gaze was sharp, and her body language suggested both authority and caution. She was aware that the outcome of this encounter could reflect on her reputation as an enforcer, and she seemed determined to ensure that she handled it properly. The friends recognized this and carefully chose their words, knowing that any misstep could escalate tensions. Despite the ongoing confrontation, there was a sense of camaraderie among the friends. They supported each other quietly, exchanging glances and subtle gestures that reinforced their unity. Even as Karen scrutinized every detail, they remained focused on enjoying the evening and maintaining a respectful dialogue. The balance between standing their ground and showing deference required constant attention, and they handled it with quiet determination. As part 2 of the story unfolded, the scene was set for what would come next. The tension between strict rules and human joy, authority, and understanding had reached a critical point. Karen's presence had transformed a simple backyard gathering into a test of patience, communication, and resilience. The friends had proven their composure and willingness to cooperate, but the outcome of the confrontation was still uncertain. The stage was ready for the next turn, a moment where actions, decisions, and a little luck could determine how the evening would continue and whether justice and reason would prevail. As the evening wore on, the tension in the backyard did not ease. Karen continued to move slowly among the group, her clipboard still in hand, and her eyes scanning every detail as if nothing could escape her notice. The friends, trying to maintain a calm and friendly atmosphere, continued their efforts to explain themselves. They repeated their points about keeping the music low, limiting the gathering to a few people, and being respectful to neighbors. Despite their patience and careful words, Karen's stance remained firm, and her presence felt heavier with each passing minute. One friend, feeling that the situation was becoming more serious, quietly suggested to the group that they document everything. Pulling out a phone, They began recording Karen's statements and actions, ensuring there would be a clear record of the interaction. The others nodded in agreement, understanding the importance of protecting themselves while remaining respectful. This small action seemed to shift the dynamic slightly, as Karen noticed the recording and paused briefly, her brow furrowing in curiosity and mild irritation. She did not stop, but the slight hesitation hinted at the fact that her authority might not be as absolute as she had assumed. The group continued their explanations, carefully outlining how they had interpreted the HOA rules and how they had made every effort to comply. They spoke calmly, without raising their voices, emphasizing that their gathering was not intended to disturb anyone. Karen listened, occasionally making notes, but her expression suggested that she was unconvinced. Still, there were subtle signs of doubt creeping in. She seemed to hesitate before writing each note, her usually confident movements slightly slower, as if the reasoning of the friends was causing her to reconsider some of her assumptions. At that moment, a neighbor, someone who had been walking their dog nearby, appeared at the edge of the yard. They had noticed the gathering and, recognizing the situation, stepped forward politely. Holding a phone in their hand, they began to speak to Karen, pointing out the relevant HOA rules that allowed small gatherings under certain conditions. They explained, in a calm and friendly manner, that the party fell well within the permitted guidelines. Karen looked surprised, her eyes widening slightly as she listened. This was not something she had anticipated, and the clarity of the explanation seemed to catch her off guard. The partygoers watched as Karen processed the information. For the first time, her firm expression showed signs of cracking. She muttered something under her breath, a small acknowledgement that she might have been mistaken. The neighbors continued, providing examples and clarifications, and even referencing written guidelines available online for anyone who needed confirmation. Karen's notes became less decisive, her gestures slower, and her authority, once unwavering, began to show signs of fragility. The friends sensed the change immediately. There was a shift in energy, a small release of tension, as they realized that the argument might finally move in their favor. They remained calm and polite, continuing to provide context where necessary, but also allowing the facts to speak for themselves. The backyard, which had been filled with unease moments earlier, began to feel a little lighter. The lights still glowed softly, casting a gentle warmth over the group, and the soft breeze carried the faint sounds of conversation from nearby houses. Karen, now confronted with evidence and clear explanations, struggled to maintain her usual authoritative stance. She questioned the neighbor, asking for further clarification about specific rules, and for the first time it became clear that she was uncertain. The friends seized this opportunity to reiterate their points, emphasizing their good intentions and compliance with regulations. They spoke with a calm confidence, knowing that the support of the neighbor and the documentation they had gathered gave them a stronger position. The conversation began to take on a more collaborative tone. Though Karen still maintained a formal edge, she asked questions rather than making accusations, and she seemed genuinely interested in understanding the details that had been provided. The partygoers continued to answer carefully, mindful of how they presented their explanations. Their focus was on clarity and honesty, providing a simple, truthful account of their actions without confrontation or exaggeration. As the discussion continued, other neighbors who had been observing from a distance started to gather at the edges of the street. They watched quietly, some curious, others concerned about how the situation might unfold. The presence of additional witnesses seemed to reinforce the friends' sense of support, and Karen's gestures grew more measured. It was as if the community itself had become part of the story. Ensuring that fairness and reason were given a chance to prevail, a subtle but important shift occurred when Karen began to reread the rules she had referenced, comparing them against the facts presented by the friends and neighbors. Her pen paused over the paper, her eyes scanning lines more carefully than she usually did. The friends watched intently, noticing her deep concentration, understanding that this moment was critical. Karen's confidence, built over years of strict enforcement, was being tested by the clear calm and factual approach of the group. The recording on the phone continued quietly in the background, capturing every word and gesture. The friends felt reassured, knowing that if the situation escalated further, They had a clear record. This sense of security allowed them to remain composed and thoughtful, responding to Karen's questions with patience and honesty. Each answer seemed to chip away at her previous assumptions, and her responses became shorter, less assertive, more reflective as Karen looked up from the rules. She met the eyes of the friends and the neighbor who had intervened. There was a moment of silent understanding, a recognition that the evening might not go as she had anticipated. The friends smiled politely, maintaining their calm demeanor, and continued to show respect while standing their ground. Karen's body language softened slightly. She lowered the clipboard, her gestures less rigid, and her tone more measured. This small shift indicated that she was beginning to see the situation differently. Realizing that the gathering was not a threat to the neighborhood's peace, the neighbor spoke again, reinforcing that small, well-managed gatherings were permitted and that there had been no complaints from other residents. Karen nodded slowly, taking a deep breath as if letting go of a preconceived notion. The friends sensed victory, though they knew it was not yet complete. They remained attentive, responding to any questions and providing additional context when needed. Every word was deliberate, every gesture thoughtful, ensuring that the interaction remained respectful and factual. Gradually, the backyard atmosphere began to shift. The tension that had dominated the early part of the evening was giving way to cautious relief. The soft string lights illuminated faces that were beginning to relax, and the breeze seemed to carry away some of the lingering unease. Karen, while still formal, had shifted from a position of confrontation to one of evaluation. She was listening more than dictating, asking questions rather than issuing statements, and slowly considering the validity of the explanations she was receiving. One of the friends made a small comment about the music, suggesting that they could adjust the volume slightly if needed, not as a concession, but as a sign of cooperation. Karen acknowledged the suggestion with a nod, her eyes softening further. This gesture, though minor, represented a turning point in the encounter. It demonstrated that she was open to compromise, and that reasoned dialogue could influence even the most steadfast enforcer. Throughout the conversation, the group remained composed, careful not to appear confrontational or dismissive. They understood that patience, clarity, and respect were crucial in navigating the situation. Karen's reactions, now more reflective than aggressive, indicated that this approach was effective. The friends had successfully transformed a potential conflict into an opportunity for understanding, highlighting the power of calm reasoning and respectful communication. As the evening deepened into twilight, the mood in the backyard continued to improve. Karen's presence, while still significant, was no longer oppressive. The friends exchanged subtle smiles and encouraging glances, feeling a sense of relief and quiet triumph. They had navigated a delicate situation with patience and composure, proving that cooperation and clear communication could overcome tension and misunderstanding by the end of this phase of the evening. It was evident that the friends had gained a degree of clarity and control over the situation. Karen, while still firm in her role as an enforcer, had begun to recognize the validity of their explanations. The backyard, once heavy with tension, now carried a sense of cautious optimism. The friends continued to engage politely, providing final clarifications and reaffirming their commitment to follow the rules. Karen listened, nodded, and slowly, the dynamic shifted from confrontation to cautious mutual understanding. The stage was now set for what would come next. The twist in the story, the moment when facts, documentation, and calm reasoning challenged the authority of a strict enforcer, had taken center stage. Karen's perspective was shifting, the Partygoers' confidence was growing, and the evening, which had begun with tension, was moving toward resolution. The friends had remained composed, respectful, and clear, demonstrating the power of patience, logic, and human connection. What had started as a confrontation was now evolving into a turning point, a moment where justice, fairness, and reason began to prevail. The backyard had shifted from tension to a quiet, suspenseful anticipation. Karen, once firm and unwavering, now stood still, her clipboard lowered, her eyes flicking between the partygoers and the neighbor who had provided clarity on the rules. The friends felt a sense of cautious optimism, knowing that the balance of the evening had started to tip in their favor. Yet, they remained composed, aware that Karen's final judgment could still swing the situation either way. The neighbor, sensing the shift in Karen's demeanor, spoke again, calmly restating the key points of the HOA rules. They explained that small, occasional gatherings like this were explicitly allowed and that there had been no complaints from other residents. Their voice was steady and reassuring, and the friends could see the effect it was having. Karen's frown softened, her posture relaxing slightly, and she began to flip through the pages on her clipboard. Comparing the guidelines she had written with the real rules being explained to her, one of the friends took a gentle step forward, thanking the neighbor for clarifying the rules, and adding that they had made every effort to respect the neighborhood's quiet environment. Their tone was calm, friendly, and non-confrontational, showing that they were willing to cooperate and listen while also asserting their own understanding of the situation. Karen listened silently, her lips pressed together, and for the first time the group saw hesitation in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. A crack in the rigid authority she had held for years. Karen adjusted her glasses, muttering softly as she reviewed her notes. She asked a few clarifying questions, her tone now less commanding and more curious. The friends answered carefully, ensuring that their responses were clear, honest, and respectful. Each answer seemed to chip away at the tension, creating a small ripple of relief through the group. The lights above glimmered softly, casting a warm glow that seemed to echo the change in atmosphere. As the conversation unfolded, more neighbors began to gather quietly at the edge of the street. They had heard about the situation and wanted to see what was happening, but they remained unobtrusive, respecting the privacy of the backyard. Their silent presence added a layer of accountability, showing that the community was attentive and invested in fairness. Karen noticed the small audience and adjusted her stance slightly, as if aware that her actions were being observed by more than just the friends in front of her. The friends took a deep breath and decided to provide a final, thorough explanation of their intentions. They highlighted that the gathering was a rare, controlled event, meant only for a handful of close friends. They explained how they had considered noise levels, placement of the lights, and even parking, to ensure that the neighbors were not disturbed. Their voices were steady, their expressions sincere, and their body language open. It was clear that they were not trying to challenge Karen personally, but simply to clarify the situation and demonstrate compliance with the rules. Karen's demeanor began to soften further. She paused, her gaze shifting from the group to the neighbor who had been assisting. She flipped back through her notes once more, reading carefully. It became apparent that the clarity and honesty of the friends, supported by the neighbor's input, were making an impact. Karen's hands relaxed on the clipboard, and she let out a small sigh, a sign that her rigid approach was beginning to yield to reason. At that moment, the first wave of acknowledgement came. Karen admitted quietly, almost reluctantly, that the gathering did indeed seem to comply with the HOA rules. The words were careful, measured, and spoke to a rare moment of concession. The friends exchanged subtle smiles, recognizing that the turning point had arrived, and the atmosphere in the backyard lightened perceptibly. The tension, which had hung over the group like a cloud, began to dissipate. Karen asked a few more questions, clarifying details about how often gatherings like this could occur and whether the friends had checked with nearby residents beforehand. Each question was answered calmly and accurately, demonstrating that the group had been thoughtful and responsible. Karen's posture continued to relax, her previous rigidity replaced by a careful, considered evaluation. It was a transformation that had taken the better part of the evening, but was now clearly evident. One of the friends gently suggested that, with this understanding, everyone could move forward and enjoy the rest of the evening responsibly. Karen nodded slowly, her eyes meeting theirs, with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The acknowledgement was small, but it carried weight. It was the moment when the authority of rules intersected with human understanding and fairness, and the group recognized it as a subtle but important victory. The soft music, which had been paused or lowered during the confrontation, gradually returned to the background. Friends began to laugh quietly, resuming their conversations in a respectful but joyful manner. The lights twinkled gently above them. The breeze rustled the leaves, and the backyard felt alive once more. The confrontation, which had seemed so tense and insurmountable just minutes before, was now resolving naturally thanks to patience, clarity, and respectful dialogue. Karen took a final look around. Noting the careful behavior of the group and the calm environment, she nodded once more, acknowledging that the gathering was not causing harm and that the friends had acted responsibly. The frown that had dominated her face earlier softened, replaced by an expression of measured approval. It was a quiet victory for the friends, a confirmation that standing firm with honesty and composure could create change even in the face of rigid authority. The neighbors who had been observing quietly began to disperse, smiling and nodding to the group as they left. The sense of community support reinforced the friends' confidence and added a layer of validation to the evening. The backyard, once tense, now carried a warm, light-hearted energy, filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft glow of string lights. The friends felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. Knowing that their patience and composure had paid off, Karen, for her part, remained in the backyard a little longer. Ensuring that everything was in order, she made a few notes on her clipboard. But her movements were now slower and more deliberate, lacking the urgency and rigidity that had marked her earlier approach. She asked a final question about the cleanup and general conduct, and the friends reassured her that they would leave the space as they had found it. Karen nodded, accepting their words, and began to step back toward the sidewalk as she walked away. The friends continued their evening, a subtle sense of triumph and relief in the air. They resumed their conversations, laughter, and activities, now fully aware of how a moment of confrontation had transformed into an experience of understanding and fairness. The tension had dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and recognition that rules and human judgment could coexist harmoniously. The backyard, illuminated by the soft light, seemed to embody the change in mood. The music played gently in the background, the air was filled with calm laughter, and the sense of community and support lingered in the quiet moments. It was a subtle but important reminder that patience, respect, and clear communication could turn a challenging situation into a moment of shared understanding. The evening continued with a renewed sense of joy and connection. Friends exchanged stories, shared food, and laughed at jokes, all while maintaining the respectful tone that had helped them navigate the confrontation. Karen's departure marked a turning point, a release of tension, and a quiet victory for those who had stood firm with honesty and patience. The backyard, once a site of uncertainty, had transformed into a place of harmony and celebration. As Part 4 came to a close, the stage was set for the final chapter. The confrontation had been resolved, justice had been subtly served, and the friends were now free to enjoy the remainder of their evening. The story had shifted from conflict to understanding, highlighting the importance of composure, reason, and respectful dialogue. What remained was the lasting impression of the night, a tale of how patience and honesty could prevail, even in the face of strict authority, setting the scene for the ultimate resolution in Part 5. The evening had shifted completely from tension and uncertainty to a calm sense of relief and subtle triumph. Karen had walked away, leaving the friends and their neighbor in the backyard, with a quiet understanding that the rules had been clarified and their actions had been within acceptable limits. The music had returned, soft and pleasant, filling the air without overwhelming the space. Laughter began to ripple through the group once more, light and carefree, reminder that the evening was meant to be about celebration and connection. The friends took a deep breath, realizing how close the situation had come to escalating unnecessarily. They had learned in real time the importance of patience, composure, and clear communication. Every word they had spoken, every gesture of respect, had played a role in shifting the dynamic. Now, as the night settled in, they could fully appreciate the significance of what had happened. It was more than just avoiding fines or confrontations. It was a moment of proving that fairness, honesty, and calm reasoning could prevail. One friend suggested that they take a moment to relax and enjoy the night fully. Glasses were filled, snacks were shared, and a sense of camaraderie returned in full force. The string lights twinkled above, casting a warm glow that seemed to mirror the relief and happiness in the group. Even those who had been tense or anxious earlier now smiled freely. Knowing that the evening was back on track, the neighbor who had intervened earlier stayed for a while longer, chatting and laughing with the group. Their presence reinforced the sense of community, a reminder that neighbors could look out for each other, help clarify misunderstandings, and contribute to a sense of shared responsibility. Stories were exchanged, jokes were told, and the atmosphere became lighthearted and playful once again. It was clear that the confrontation with Karen, while stressful, had strengthened the bonds among those present and highlighted the value of respectful dialogue. As the night progressed, the friends reflected quietly on what had just transpired. They marveled at how quickly a moment of misunderstanding could escalate and how effectively it could be resolved when approached with patience and evidence. The recording on the phone, initially a precaution, was now a source of reassurance. It had captured the interaction accurately and ensured that the truth was clearly documented. The friends knew that having a record had been a wise choice, providing both protection and confidence. Karen's brief but intense visit had also become a talking point. Friends exchanged subtle smiles when recalling her sharp eyes, her clipboard, and her meticulous inspection. It had been a little intimidating at first, but now, with the tension dissolved, it became almost comical in memory. They laughed quietly, acknowledging how seriously she had taken her role and how unexpected the situation had been. The humor was light, not mocking, and it contributed to the warmth and ease of the evening. Some of the friends decided to step outside the backyard briefly, waving to neighbors who had been observing quietly from a distance. There was an unspoken acknowledgement of mutual respect, a shared understanding that the evening had been navigated successfully. The community had witnessed a small conflict, one that could have escalated, but instead had been resolved with clarity and fairness. It was a subtle but meaningful victory for everyone involved, a reminder that reason and patience could influence even strict authority. Back in the backyard, conversation flowed easily. Stories of past gatherings, shared experiences, and hopes for the future filled the space. The music continued, light and unobtrusive, blending seamlessly with the sounds of laughter and chatter. The tension that had dominated the early evening was gone, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and relief. The friends were fully aware of how a few careful actions, honest explanations, and the support of a thoughtful neighbor had transformed what could have been a stressful confrontation into a moment of justice and understanding. The night deepened, and the glow of the string lights reflected softly on faces relaxed with smiles. The friends reminisced quietly about the day's events, noting how the confrontation had tested their composure and how successfully they had navigated it. They understood that this evening would be remembered, not only for the celebration but also for the way they had handled an unexpected challenge. It was a lesson in human interaction, patience, and the power of calm, respectful communication. As the group began to wind down, conversations became softer, laughter quieter, and the night air cool and comforting. The backyard had transformed from a place of conflict to a haven of understanding. Friends exchanged thanks for each other's patience, for support, for the shared effort in ensuring the gathering remained peaceful and enjoyable. Even those who had been more nervous earlier recognized the strength it had taken to remain calm and composed. The neighbor who had helped clarify the rules prepared to leave, offering final words of encouragement. They reminded the friends that it was always wise to be aware of rules and regulations, but that standing firm with honesty and clear communication could make a significant difference. The friends thanked them sincerely, acknowledging that their support had been crucial in resolving the confrontation. There was a sense of mutual respect, an understanding that small actions could have a meaningful impact in difficult situations. As the neighbor walked away, the friends reflected on the broader implications of the evening. They had faced a challenge, stayed composed, and ensured that fairness and reason prevailed. The experience had reinforced their confidence in handling similar situations in the future. It was a quiet form of justice, a recognition that staying calm, respectful, and prepared could protect one's rights while maintaining harmony. The party slowly returned to its intended purpose. Music played softly, people shared stories, and food and laughter filled the backyard once again. The friends moved freely, no longer constrained by tension, and enjoyed the warm, inviting atmosphere that had returned. It was a moment of human connection, one that highlighted both the importance of community and the value of standing firm with honesty and patience. As the night continued, the friends looked around at the peaceful surroundings. The houses on the street were calm, neighbors' lights twinkled in the distance, and the gentle breeze carried the soft sounds of conversation. The sense of accomplishment lingered, not as a loud triumph, but as a quiet, profound satisfaction. They had navigated a difficult situation, preserved the integrity of their gathering, and reinforced the importance of clear communication and mutual respect.